look, I know Jewish Democrats who are really, really worried about Kamala. And it's not just about Israel.
Mm.
There's a sense that the world is going to go to hell with another 4 years of weak leadership because there's a real sense of naivete
Mm.
among the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden world, where they still don't understand that so much of the world, the only way you keep stability and peace is by showing strength, not by keep calling for ceasefires and so forth. So there's a real fear among friends of mine on the left, the Democrats, that 4 more years of weakness will only get us closer to World War III.
Well, let me start by welcoming you, David, and welcoming Alan Howe, welcoming Piers Ackerman. Good to have you all. And David, we see the American election, of course, from the far, and we are not inside as you are and living it day by day, minute by minute. What I can tell you is that I'm old enough to have seen many US elections in my lifetime, and I think this one is the most divided election that I've seen. What is your view on this? How is it impacting the future of American politics, and in particular, how is it impacting the politics inside the Jewish community, or communities, I should say?
It's easily the most divisive I've ever seen our community. And one of the reasons is because there's a sense of life and death. So if you speak to Kamala Harris voters, if Trump wins, it's the end of the world, the end of America. And if Kamala wins, it's the end of America. It's always the end, the end, the end. It's alarmism to its maximum point. And and it's a little bit frustrating for me as a journalist who wants to have some kind of really interesting, thoughtful dialogue. There is no room now for thoughtful dialogue because it's in a state of virtual civil war. And each side absolutely must win. So that's the overall big picture. In terms of the Jewish community, what I've noticed in recent weeks, especially among the Orthodox community, a sense that a rallying around Donald Trump for the simple reason of if you love Israel, it's got to be Trump. So it's become a one-issue election for many Jews. They may hate Trump, but they will vote for him just because of Israel. As far as Kamala Harris, as you well know, American Jews have a long, long tradition since FDR of voting Democrat. It's kind of part of the, especially the non-Orthodox Jewish Ashkenazi tradition, is they vote Democrats because a lot of issues are more important than Israel. You have abortions and you have the economy and all kinds of other issues. And Israel is not always number one with that crowd. So there's that reflexive vote for Democrat, no matter who runs, they vote Democrat. This year, from what I understand, there's a lot more ambivalence among many Democrat Jews about voting Democrat. So, it doesn't mean though that they're going to vote for Trump. So basically it's a big mess. I think America is broken in many ways. And we have a situation where we don't have the leaders that can get us out of our mess. And the media has conspired to continue with this. There's such a level of hypocrisy in the media where they will accuse Republicans of undermining democracy. Meanwhile, they promote this woman who never got one vote in primaries. And all of a sudden, they do a virtual coup where they decide that the one who legitimately and democratically won the nomination, Joe Biden, all of a sudden, he has a terrible debate, and they stop hiding his, lack of cognitive ability. And all of a sudden, they promote her, right? That's a blatant violation of democratic norms, but you'll never read that in the mainstream press because their objective is to get rid of Trump. There's a sense of we must win at all costs. That's the big picture right now.
So the anti-Semitism that we've seen in the United States since October 7, and by the way, it's not an isolated case because in Australia, we have a terrible epidemic of anti-Semitism, if I can put it that way. So that surely has impacted the Jewish community in their thoughts and their way of looking at things. How do you think the two campaigns are reacting towards that? How do they addressing the issue? It would be good to hear your view.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag because Trump is his worst enemy. He's got a real vulgar side. He has no inhibitions. He has no filter. So he will often say things, if I lose, it's going to be the fault of the Jews, which is a horrible thing to say, which can increase anti-Semitism, right? But that the other token, that what he did for Israel was better than pretty much any other president. One of the mistakes that the Democrats have made is that they keep going after Trump. And they don't realize that their biggest rival is not Trump. It's Trump's first term. And this is what the main obstacle for the Democrats to really gain more traction is that the majority of Americans were much happier during the first 3 years of Donald Trump's tenure, obviously before that once in a century pandemic hit, which kind of threw all the cards away. But before the pandemic hit, they were much better under the first term. So it's not as if we have this fictitious, speculative, individual. He's got a real record that he can run. And Kamala Harris hasn't been able to distance herself from Joe Biden. Joe Biden won by moving to the center, and that's how he got the nomination. But when he got into the White House, he moved to the left, and he enabled the progressive left to kind of take over his agenda, and pretty much he ruled as under the progressive leftist agenda, which is not the mainstream American position. Progressive make a lot of noise, but they don't represent the majority of Americans. So right now, Kamala Harris is in a trap because not only did her predecessor rule from the left, but she's even further left than Joe Biden. So she's desperately tried to move herself to the center because her people are smart. They read the polls and they said, so all of a sudden she acts like she's for fracking, which we know is BS. She acts like she's, very moderate on gun control and on the border and all those things. And it doesn't resonate in a truthful way. So they're in a trap. But look,
how about her reaction and her remarks on anti-Semitism? What is her view on that?
Well, it's like she's stuck in the middle because she can't afford to lose Michigan. Michigan's got, a huge Muslim population.
So you're saying she's pandering to the anti-Semites?
She's trying to thread the needle and have it both ways. I'll give you an incredible example of this to show you how conspiratorial the media is. CBS was the original Tiffany network. It was, Walter Cronkite. It was the epitome of great journalism was CBS. So listen to this. They edited an answer from Kamala Harris where the first part was, I want to help Israel defend itself and I'm committed, right? And then they literally took that out and kept the middle part, which was more kind of neutral.
That's kind of so easy to do, David. There is a new AI. Let me tell you what it's called. The name escapes me, but I was playing with it only yesterday. David, you can sample anybody's voice.
Oh, no, I'm saying this is CBS. No, I'm talking about CBS. This is
they probably use
the one that did it. So it's not a question of how they do it. It's the question that they would have the chutzpah to do journalistic malpractice.
Yeah.
Okay. But
You're talking about the
going back
60-minute interview, right?
right, that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Going back on Kamala, she's been trying to thread that needle. And the question is, how many independents are going to buy it? In America, you can't win without the independents in the election. So you have seven, battleground states. Um, and this is where the big fight is happening right now.
Hmm.
And a lot of these are independents. Are they going to buy her act that she's really a lot more moderate than what we've seen from her? And if they do buy it, then she has a chance to win. But if they don't, then they're going to have to hold their nose and vote for Trump.
Mm. Piers and Alan, feel free to cut in.
So, David, just one easy question. How important is the Jewish vote in America these days, apart from New York and Los Angeles?
I think it's made out to be more important than it really is. Um, there is a sense that you don't want to piss off AIPAC. And a couple of years ago, they decided to jump into the electoral fray, which means that a lot of the money they raise now helps elect politicians. For decades, they never did that. So they really took the gloves off a couple of years ago, which is a game-changing thing. And I think this is on the mind of, you know, all politicians in Washington, whether in Congress or whether you're running for president. And I think Kamala has been very careful with the so-called Jewish vote. Now, Jews vote more than the average, but the Jewish vote in California is useless because it's going to go Democratic no matter what. And I think really the real issue is Michigan.
Yeah.
Because the real issue is Michigan, and she's trying to play both sides. And how many Jews is she going to lose? I don't think that many.
Mm.
I don't think that many. Jews are not up for play. Jews are addicted to voting Democrats on the left and on the right, among the Persians, among the Sephardim, among the Orthodox. They're going to vote Republican no matter what. I think
You
the
mean
Jewish vote.
Democrats? You mean Democrats?
No. They're going to vote Republican no matter what.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. So the Jewish vote is pretty set. Now there is trepidation. Look, I know Jewish Democrats who are really, really worried about Kamala. And it's not just about Israel.
Mm.
There's a sense that the world is going to go to hell with another 4 years of weak leadership because there's a real sense of naivete among the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden world, where they still don't understand that so much of the world, the only way you keep stability and peace is by showing strength, not by keep calling for ceasefires and so forth. So there's a real fear among friends of mine on the left, the Democrats, that 4 more years of weakness will only get us closer to World War III.
David, you said one thing about AIPAC before. I just want to go down that rabbit hole a little bit more. When you say people are really afraid of AIPAC, what you mean is that they've got the ability of raising money. That's the only way that they would be afraid of them. But isn't that compensated by all the super PACs that have billions of dollars and are helping the other side? Like, for instance, we had some Palestinians that have raised, hundreds of millions. I think it is.
No doubt. No doubt. Everything AIPAC is doing is completely fair and square.
I want just to say, because I'm afraid of what the understanding or the misunderstanding can be. AIPAC is really an above board organization. And
100%.
and they totally law-abiding citizens, and therefore it's all within the U.S. legislation. And if the U.S. have an issue with that, they should reform their fundraising laws. That
right.
many
Well,
other
there was a
countries,
major
including
decision.
Israel, does that.
There was a major decision in the Supreme Court a few years ago that considered money speech. So that's why there's so much money involved in terms of lobbying, because it's considered, protected by speech. AIPAC is, their big thing is the Israeli-American relationship, and they do incredibly important work because they keep, especially with the Democrats, and Israel is blessed to have the most powerful parliament in human history squarely on its side. But that doesn't mean that the executive branch is going to be, following in that spirit, because the executive branch is very determinative when it comes to foreign policy. And, you could say the worst things about Donald Trump, and I will agree with all of it. But there is one thing about him that has a tremendous value, which is they're afraid of him in the Middle East and around the world. The very fact that he's a unpredictable bully is often exactly what you need in that part of the world. And I can't say that about either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris.
To your point, David, before you said that the Ashkenazi Jews have this reflex of voting Democrat no matter what. As you know, I was recently in Israel, and I met some of my good friends in Israel that are American. And guess what? They've already voted, and they voted for Kamala. And I was actually very surprised, because they're living on a daily basis the impact of the Biden policies in Israel, which are not all that bad. There's some good parts, like the latest action of Biden was quite remarkable, of sending some elements to add to their defensive shield operations with 100 soldiers to operate the new technology. I thought that was fantastic. But in many
Kamala is not Biden. Kamala is not Biden. Biden is an expression in America, Jews. It's called in the kishkis, right? Joe Biden has Israel in his kishkis. He's been visiting prime ministers now for 50 years. He's really tied in to Israel. He's had a huge falling out with Bibi this past year. There's a kind of loss of trust between the two of them. So, but the Jews in America, don't have the same faith in Kamala, many of them, as they do with Joe Biden. So there is some, concern that Kamala Harris, and it's not just her decision, because if she's influenced by the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, that is not pro-Israel, and you have, the squad and AOC and so forth. She doesn't strike me as a strong enough leader to determine her own road, whereas, many Jews here in America are concerned that she will be influenced by the anti-Israel part of the Democratic Party, and that's concerning.
Hasn't that influence already taken place?
Well, she's not president yet, so the influence, I think Biden has such a connection with Israel that he was able to still do his thing. But Joe Biden was really against Bibi. He really pushed for a ceasefire, early on with Gaza, for the hostage deal. And that was a serious disagreement between the two. And they tried to downplay it, but they had, the language that they end up using, like at one point, don't bullshit me, Bibi. These guys are close. They've known each other for 30 years. And it got personal at some point. And they really broke. And even in 2023, they had hundreds of thousands of Israelis demonstrating every Saturday night, with the judicial reforms. And, Biden moved away from Israel. Biden was very disappointed by Bibi's leadership. The fact that he made a deal with the devil and had to make a deal with, far-right extremists to stay in power and so forth. So there were a lot of, areas of antagonism between the two. However, the reality is, no matter what, no matter who's running Israel, if the Iranians start to shoot at Israel, the U.S. is going to be there. And Bibi knows that. When push comes to shove, America stands by Israel. Now, it's true that, Israel could have showed a lot more gratitude because let me tell you, all those rounds of ammunition, I'm sure, Alan, as you know, tremendous amount of armament and weaponry and everything during the beginning of the war in Gaza. So I think there was a sense that they didn't show enough gratitude. And look, they were not on the same page. The previous government, Naftali Bennett and Lapid, they also had major disagreements with the same administration, but they had a little more sechol. They had more finesse. They didn't make it too public. This government does not have the finesse, and Bibi is beholden to a far right that wants to populate Gaza. As far, there is a convention that happened a few days ago in Israel about resettling Gaza.
Yeah, we saw that.
Yeah. So
but that was by extreme rightists.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's
right,
not
right.
representing
Look,
the view of the majority of Israelis
I have to say,
and the security establishment.
A big thing has changed in Israel since September 17th, and I've changed with it. All right. I was very much anti-Bibi the whole year. I thought that, they weren't really winning in Gaza. Thought he should have made a deal for the hostages, blah, blah, blah. But on the day that those pagers blew up in Lebanon was the day of a major turnaround in terms of regaining the deterrence and the mystique that Israel used to have, because they've survived for 75 years by having that mystique, by the enemies being afraid of them. All that went away on October 7th. I did not feel that Bibi regained that deterrence in the first 10 months of the war in Gaza. All right. But the deterrence started coming back on the day that they had this incredible victory, which kind of spooked the enemy. And from that day on, with the murder, with the killing of Nasrallah, with the killing of Sinwar, they've really kind of turned the picture around. And I think the mood in Israel right now is we're thinking victory. We have the enemy on the run, and the last thing they want to talk about right now is a ceasefire. So, and I'm going along with that energy as well. Meanwhile, America's not changing its tune. That same tune of ceasefire, ceasefire before, ceasefire after. There's not very much appetite in Israel right now for a ceasefire. Not winning.
Yes, not only 2 days ago, we had Boaz Ganor talking about this. It would be interesting if you could have a look at what Boaz was saying, because he actually totally disagrees. He thinks that Israel should have stopped the war on Gaza and focus on the bigger enemy, that is Iran and Hezbollah. And he was saying that Hamas and Gaza was only a small incident in Israel's life. He did not believe that was...
I totally agree with him. I totally agree with him.
The amount of resources and soldiers that have been killed and injured,
100%.
5,000.
I was saying that all year long. I hated how they prosecuted war in Gaza and everything. What I'm saying, though, is something changed. Eventually, they really got it right. And the way they've done Lebanon is the exact opposite of how they treated Hamas. So now you can really see that the picture has changed. Instead of Hamas first and Gaza first, now let's take the big organs first. Let's go after...
There's a turnaround for sure.
Yeah, it's a major turnaround. And let's not forget that Hezbollah is the number one proxy of Iran. And that's being severely weakened right now. And I think they need to continue with the Houthis in Yemen. I think we got them on the run right now. And that includes Iran.
Yeah.
And we're waiting now any day.
David,
so what's happening now is, after being humiliated and humbled on October 7th, finally, Israel is finally getting its mojo back. And not a minute too soon.
Okay, David, let's go back to the US elections. And the question I have about the media, it's really quite staggering. Why is the mainstream media so obsessed in making Donald Trump lose?
There's an answer to that. 50 years ago, traditionally, journalists in America were like from the working class. They were not these elite trust fund babies that you have now. The journalists in America right now, they're part of the elite and they hang around with each other, whether you're at CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, they hang around the same hotel lobbies. They go to the same parties. They're part of the elite set. It's not a coincidence that they know very little about a Trump voter. So and the reality is all the news is being covered by people who despise Trump, right? You look at academia, for example. If 95% of your faculty leans left, and if you only have 5% of the faculty that is conservative, it's not a surprise that you get this incredible anti-Israel vibe, this obsession with DEI and so forth. Same thing with the media. The great majority of reporters in the mainstream are all in the same groupthink. And unfortunately, it used to be a time when journalists had the credibility and the integrity to put their professional obligation above their personal political choice. But that's not true today. There was a moment in time when the head of New York Times said, it's different. Now that Trump is elected, it's different. So if I read the New York Times avidly, because I'm a student of media bias, and there are days when there will be 10 op-eds, 9 of them lean to Trump. I see how the reporting is slanted by how they write the headlines. I've been an avid student of media bias since 2016, and the bias never goes away. For about 5 minutes after Trump got elected, it was kind of humorous, where all of a sudden New York Times is, oh my God, what did we miss in America? How could we have missed such a big story? And because they were, assuming that 65 million Trump voters are all racist. How did we miss? And then that lasted about 5 minutes. And they went right back to spending the whole term of Trump. They were out to destroy him. You name it. The whole, Russian hoax thing. It was like amazing that the guy accomplished anything. And in 2020, the reason he lost was because of the blatant bias by the media that hid that laptop story that the New York Post covered and other things that they found out from research later on that Trump would have won in 2020 had the media not been so biased. So it's a very sad state of affairs in America, because the biggest crisis we have now in this country is a crisis of trust. If you see the Gallup polling in the last 10 years, the chart they all go like this: trust in the institutions, trust in the Department of Justice, trust in Congress, trust in media. And it's the kind of news story you're not going to hear in Australia, and you're not going to hear it from the mainstream media, because they have an interest in not telling you that. So when they tell you that there's a problem with trust, they will tell you, well, you can't trust disinformation that comes from the right. So the whole thing is a total loss of integrity among the media. And let's see what happens now. Let's see if Trump wins. What are they going to do now? One of the stories that's been lost in all this picture is the Democrats used to be the party of the working class. That's gone. The Democrats are now the party of the elite. And one of the reasons Trump did so well, which I spoke at the dialogue, I remember at the King David Hotel, when you asked me to speak about how you could get elected, that was a key thing. The guy understood the working class in America that keeps getting ripped off by China, ripped off by by all the deals, the NAFTA deals, ripped off by globalism, ripped off by open borders, and ripped off by all this manufacturing that is leaving America for other places, right? And Trump put his finger on it, and that's the key reason why he's maintained such popularity, is because the Democrats abandoned the working class.
Mhm. Alan Howe.
Yeah, David, thanks for that. When they assassinated Hennier, and not just killed him, but killed him in Tehran, which was just brilliant, there was a lot of criticism about A, the assassination, and B, the fact that it was carried out in a third country. And the sort of message in the left-wing media around the world was, Israel cannot assassinate its way to victory. But then, we had the pages, and that was like Israel's Entebbe moment. And then the next day, the walkie-talkies, and then they've killed Nasrallah, and they've nailed Sinwar and others. You can assassinate your way to victory. Would you agree?
Oh, I disagree. Oh my God. I completely disagree. There was a piece in the New York Times yesterday, and they were trying to make that same point. So they quoted Mika Goodman and Yossi on how thing, and then they, said you can't kill your way to victory and to that. Right now, the great majority of Israelis are in the opposite camp, because the fundamental reality about the Middle East is the enemies of Israel want to murder Israel. If there was a button right now where a Hamas guy can press the button and he can kill 6.5 million Jews in Israel, he would press that button. Every Hezbollah terrorist, if we gave him a button, press this button, and 6.5 million Jews die right away. All the Jews of Israel die. This is the fundamental reality, and it's really an inconvenient truth for a very sophisticated guy like Tony Blinken, and for all these very sophisticated think tanks that go to Ivy Leagues, and they go to fancy cocktail parties, and they live in DC in the comfort of their American homes, to kind of think that it's so much more sophisticated to talk about how the Palestinian Authority can be reformed, and we will reform them, and then they'll come back to Gaza and they will be reformed, and then Hamas will eventually evaporate, and then that will have a domino effect where Hezbollah will stop, bombing the north of Israel, and then eventually Iran will kind of get smaller because Israel will make a deal with Saudi Arabia. All this kind of speculation is based on a naive interpretation of the region. And this has been the wake-up call of October 7th. It took everything, all the truth of 75 years, and it magnified it times 1,000. And if you live in Israel, you're forever shaken by October 7th. But if you live outside of Israel, October 7th, it comes and goes, right? It's just another event right now. And it's like Israel. Everything becomes, theoretical when you're outside of Israel. I spent 2 long trips in Israel. So did, Albert. And I got to tell you, it's a whole different take over there. And they're saying, we're giving you the middle fucking finger, excuse my language. Right now, they're looking at the world. They're in a life and death battle. They're in an existential crisis. And even if it means giving the middle finger to the world, including Macron, right? The president
Especially
of France,
Macron.
who has the chutzpah. So there's a completely different mindset right now happening in Israel. And I got to tell you guys, I feel it on the left in Israel, on the left, that there's a sense that even if I hate Bibi, right now we got our enemy on the run. The key fact of the Middle East is the understanding of the nature of your enemy. This is not an enemy that wants to end the occupation. This is not an enemy that is looking for Palestinian independence. This is an enemy that is obsessed with the elimination of Jews.
Mm-hmm. And David, I may add what you said before, that if you gave a button to Hezbollah to press and to kill 6.5 million Jews in Israel, they would press that button. I would say that if you give them a bigger button and say, press that one, you kill every Jew around the world, they would press it too.
In a minute. And the reason they can't do it is because Israel is strong. But what happened is October 7th wow, it kind of say, hey, maybe we can get these guys. We invaded the big bad Israel, the biggest army in the Middle East. We invaded them and murdered 1,200 of them. So they got to kind of win in their sails. And that's why it's absolutely critical to crush them. They need to be crushed over and over again. And Israelis understand that. It's kind of look, my daughter gets all these bombs where she lives up north. Half of her time she's in a bomb shelter.
Why, in recent weeks, it might just be the perspective we get on it, but they've gone quiet on what is probably the most powerful argument against terrorists, which is the illegal immigrants and that open door you've got down south where anybody, and it's not just South Americans that are coming in, it's Chinese and Arabs and all sorts. Why is that sort of dipped in urgency?
It really, I would think it's the number one Achilles heel of the Democratic Party. And they know it. They know it. And that's why you'll see all this subterfuge, all this sophistry, and all this gaslighting as if, no, it's not that much of a problem. And it's the fault of the Republicans because they had a deal in Congress that they didn't agree to. They realize it's a huge, weakness for them. And if they end up losing the election, I think you'd have to put that on the top of the list. Now, for years they've said, the more immigrants come in, the more they end up voting Democrats, and then we get to have a permanent majority in America. That's been the traditional conventional wisdom. The irony is that there's so many Mexicans now that are moving to the right because they're also against the open border. And, like a lot of the immigrants have a sense of religion, they're Christians. So they've come closer to the right because they feel alienated by by much of what they see on the left, and that includes open borders. So in many ways, I think the Democrats might have outsmarted themselves with this assumption that the more millions of immigrants that we let in will turn into Democratic voters. The other thing that changed this year is that those governors in the South were very smart. When they got those buses and they send them out to all those blue states, and then you have, New York and Chicago and Boston and all these places were like inundated with the immigrants that were traditionally only the burden of the southern states. So that made the problem more of a national problem, which I think really hurt the Democrats. Look, I mean, it's law and order. There are certain things that, it's just a question of sanity. During 2020, they had this thing called, defund the police. That's not an American idea. That's a progressive leftist idea. They're trying to take far left ideas and make them mainstream. And there's so much white guilt in America, and there's so much hatred for Republicans that the Democrats who hate those leftist ideas keep their mouth shut because they don't want to help the other side, right? So you end up having the mainstreaming of really extremist ideas, like defunding the police, like open borders, like all these men playing in women's volleyball, and you can't speak up because if I do, you're going to be accused of being a transphobe. So they're really trying to normalize and mainstream some extremist ideas, and unfortunately, mainstream Democrats who know better are keeping their mouth shut because they're afraid that if they speak up, it's going to help the other side, or they don't want to be accused of being racist, right? Black Lives Matter, defrauded millions of dollars. That didn't help the blacks. It helped the leaders, and they bought big mansions with that money. Nobody will ever say that, right? You'll never find one of those very sophisticated Jeffrey Goldberg the head of the Atlantic or the New York Times. It's so rare to see a democratic, sophisticated thinker take on Black Lives Matter because you don't want to be accused of being racist and because you want to stay in the right set. You know, Ta-Nehisi Coates just wrote a book, which is the most blatantly biased pro-Palestinian essay you can ever imagine. But they're all walking on eggshells around him because he's royalty in democratic circles. Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's won all the awards. So they have to tiptoe around him, even though what he did was blatant bias. That's journalistic malpractice, if you ask me. Meanwhile, they had one guy on CBS who had the integrity to ask him tough questions. And that guy, they came down on him because the employees at CBS came down, and it turns out that they decided that his questions were too tough, which is so patronizing. It's as if we're telling this Black author, you're too weak to defend yourself. We need to come to your rescue. At the end of the day, all this incredible emphasis on skin color in America has hurt the Blacks more than anything. And it's so patronizing. We're assuming they have no agency. And it's really going backwards. Right now in America today, you say colorblind, not a good thing. That's kind of racist. During the days of Martin Luther King, that was the great ideal, where we'll be judged by the, content of our character rather than the color of our skin. You can't even say those things anymore. You'll be accused of being racist. This is all about power. It is a power grab. And there's been a movement to use skin color to grab a tremendous amount of power. And you see it now across the universities where meritocracy is an ancient anachronistic idea. The old days when merit ruled the day. No more. And that includes companies, DEI. It's true that there's a small backlash, but it's a small backlash. In fact, even in the Army, diversity, equity, and inclusion has now become a bigger priority than whether you can fight. So this is where America's going. It's a fragile nation that's got an enormous margin of error. And this is where I give Israel the edge, because Israel does not raise fragile kids. By necessity, the reality and having to live and internalize this harsh reality makes it virtually impossible to become fragile. And yet in America, this is where we're going. We're a country that's become fat, lazy, complacent, and taking advantage of this enormous margin of error. And I think that you can give an edge to Israel on that front. They don't have that luxury. Whether things can change in America, I'm always an optimist. And, I see things like Bill Maher, for example. He's a classic king of the left, right? But he's got the chutzpah and the integrity to, become unpopular with his fans, right? He's one of those rare voices that's not afraid to be unpopular, and he tells it like it is. And I think you got this big movement now of independent media. You got podcasters with millions of followers. You got the Joe Rogans and all that. And like these mainstream media that I've been quoting to you are becoming like dinosaurs in a way, right? And there's a new movement, thanks to technology that is kind of pushing back. You got so let's see what happens. I'm not giving up on this great country, but the election on November 5th is going to be very determinate, very consequential.
David, just one last question for me, if I may.
Yeah.
Tim Walz clearly is not, but is J.D. Vance a politician for the future?
That is a fantastic question, I have to say, and it's one of the toughest questions to answer. I asked Ben Shapiro, I was with him for lunch on Friday, Albert, and he got his real pulse on what's going on. And Vance is extremely bright. He's also a real gentleman. right? But there's a lot we don't know about him, right? Like, for example, he's also an isolationist, which is, America first. Now, Trump may be America first, but I don't think the world could survive with an isolationist America. And that is one of the big things that we do not know about J.D. Vance. But I have to tell you, he's extremely bright and he's a gentleman. He did very well in the debate against Walz. The media hates him. The mainstream media, they despise him. They're always looking for a reason to bash him, and they use all the stuff that, he said in the past that he obviously regrets. But he's a force. And if Trump wins, keep an eye out on this man.
Mhm.
He's a
David,
force.
I want to, first of all, to thank you for a real frank talk. I mean, you've been super frank on every issue.
Your
not held
podcast,
back.
this is the only podcast where I'm the most frank. I think it's a combination of knowing you guys, because you hate bullshit. It's the name of the podcast and my relationship with you. And you're in Australia. You got what I gave you today was the absolute frankest possible.
Yeah, we can tell. David, before we part, I know you have a new vision for the Jewish Journal. Would you mind expanding on this and tell us what's coming up?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I think what America needs the most right now is deeper, more elevated conversation. And nobody in the media has been trying to do that. And we're relaunching the journal with, I mentioned that to you, where the theme is going to be elevate the conversation. We're going to have, we have two analysts. Our analyst in America is Dan Schnur, and our analyst in Israel is Shmuel Rosner. They are experts at elevating the conversation. They're truthful, accurate, but the idea is to create thoughtful content that engages rather than inflames, right? And we're already geared up for that. So we've been doing it for years. It's just now we're trying to take it to the next level. We're going to have conversation about conversation. We're going to,
That'll be daily. It won't be weekly.
It's daily because, we're making a big deal now of the digital component, which is daily. The print continues, but we're taking advantage of the digital technology to really become more of a global force, is really what we're trying to do. And we're figuring America really needs this right now. So if you want to come to a website and a news company where you can feel elevated, where the analysis and the commentary is not there to inflame you, but rather to elevate your conversations at the Shabbat table, this is the place.
Very good. Alan, thank you. David, great to see you as always. And
as
we'll
always, Albert,
soon.
I'm glad it finally worked. Okay.
Good to see you, mate.